As we move into the second presidency of the Federalist era, we have John Adams, who was kind of the hand-picked politician to succeed after Washington. Now, Washington had set an example by stepping down after 2 terms, yet that wasn't in the Constitution. So as we look at John Adams' presidency and the major events of that presidency, we see that we can capture our themes again. We see here that we have government or politics. We see here that we have more politics, more politics, more politics, and finally more politics. Now, we see here that we have foreign policy. Foreign policy, and this, although political, is still related to foreign policy. So in 2 themes, we should be able to sum up the presidency of John Adams. Let's start out with the foreign policy aspects. Now, with the foreign policy, we see that we are dealing with France. Now, there was never a declared war, but the French were attacking our ships, and of course, there was the idea of trade being interrupted as well. So we sent off some ambassadors to meet with the leaders of France. This was the XYZ affair. Now, when they arrived, they requested an audience with the leaders of France, but they were denied. And they were told that they would have to basically pay a bribe in order to even meet with the leaders of France. And our 3 ambassadors refer to their 3 ambassadors there, that as X, Y, and Z. And they stated, or we stated, that we won't give a penny. And this angered not just our leaders, but our people. Then, in order to help finance his new navy that John Adams was going to implement, and to protect the power of our new central government as we had this quasi-threat with France, John Adams would pass the Alien and Sedition Act. Now, this Alien and Sedition Act would limit speech against the government. It also would keep an eye on and put limitations on immigration. Now, the other political party, as we see here with the partisan politics, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, believed this was the president overstepping his powers as interpreted in the Constitution. And they wrote, and then were able to have the states of Kentucky and Virginia pass 2 resolutions that spoke out against the Sedition Act, arguing that it violated the Constitution, arguing that it was an overstepping of the bounds, and specifically arguing that a state could nullify a national act within its own boundaries, not for other states. And Kentucky and Virginia both passed these resolutions written by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Now that Sedition Act and those naturalization acts towards immigrants and immigrations would stick around until James Adams would lose the election in 1800. And hence we have what we call a revolution in 1800, but it's a political revolution. And this political revolution sees the Federalist era start to come to an end, and the Democratic Republicans under Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe in the future, start to establish what we would later call the Virginia dynasty, as 3 presidents in a row would come straight out of Virginia. Now, in winning this election of 1800, one of the first acts that Jefferson would do is to get rid of the Sedition Act. But then he had to deal with something that John Adams was able to accomplish prior to leaving his office, and that was the Midnight Judges. What John Adams was able to do was appoint his new Chief Justice, John Marshall, who was a Federalist, and he was able to appoint other judges to positions in the national government under the judiciary system. And with that, he did establish a kind of a foothold in that third branch by the Federalist Party, because both the executive and the legislative branches had now been given to the leadership, through elections of course, to the Democratic Republicans. Now, when James Madison became a member of Jefferson's cabinet, he denied these judgeships. And when he denies these judgeships, one of the judges, by the name of William Marbury, would sue, believing that his constitutional appointments had been denied. And therefore, Madison had overstepped his constitutional powers. In this groundbreaking court case, known as Marbury versus Madison, as in James Madison, the Supreme Court would have to judge the constitutionality of this action by Madison. And in that case, again, Marbury versus Madison, we have the establishment of what becomes known as judicial review. This is extremely important because it finally sets a precedent for the judicial branch to have the checks and balances towards the other branches. With judicial review, they get to judge constitutionality of a government action. And one of those things they would judge was this Judiciary Act, the prior Judiciary Act from the 1790s. And they believed that that was an unconstitutional power that the executive branch had practiced. And in establishing judicial review, the judicial branch now was going to be a little bit more equal.